Dear Logan, when at last we meet again, you should probably know that I'm not the same girl I was when I got here. That's for sure. I've learned a lot. For example, I've learned in Alaska. It's cold. It's wet. Everything is slow. Especially the mail. Maddie. The summer between 8th grade and Logan's freshman year of high school, he grew 4 inches and gained 35 pounds. Probably another 20 pounds turned from baby fat to muscle. And his feet grew so much his mother started to buy shoes 2 sizes too big. The president used to joke that it was going to impact the national debt just to feed him. It wasn't funny. It wasn't fun, and it wasn't funny. Not for Logan, at least. It was like going to bed one night and waking up every morning in an entirely different body. One that didn't move the same, didn't feel the same, work in the same way, and the one he had always known. His fingers were clumsy and his feet were chunky, and it felt like he was constantly at risk of moving too fast in the wrong direction and toppling over. It seemed to take months for his center of gravity to feel like his own again. And this is what that felt like. Walking through the woods, still numb and angry, his hands bound in front of him as he plodded up the hill and over the rough ground. Logan's feet were heavier than they should have been. He stumbled and shuffled and dragged his feet. Dragged his all-new terrain boots over terrain that had never once been that he had never could have dreamed of. Logan was in good shape. He played sports in school and liked to swim and play pickup games with the off-duty service agents who always seemed to be hanging around the court at the White House. But he was tired. He was winded. He wanted to sit and stare forever. He wanted Maddie back. He had just gotten Maddie back. Logan didn't care when he ran into a tree, limp, and broke it. When he kicked a rock and sent it over the steep face of the hill, lost in the mud and the muck. It started drizzling, but he barely felt it. Logan barely felt anything. At least he didn't until the man with the gun started to laugh. "What's so funny?" Logan spat out the words, rainwater clinging to his mouth as he spewing forward like he might be rabid. The kidnapper smiled. You, thinking you're going to leave a trail for someone to follow. You have seen too many movies, my friend. I'm not your friend. No, you are my hostage. Walk." Logan turned and did as he was told, but he couldn't shut up. That was asking too much. His hands were starting to numb, and he had to use his arms to lean at the waist to try to get enough momentum to drag his body upward. "Do you really think no one is going to miss me? I thought you knew who I was. People tend to notice if the first kid goes AWOL. There is no one to miss you." Now Logan wanted to laugh. "I'm the president's only child. When Maddie and I don't come back, they'll have an army in these woods. They'll have the army." The man spun. He spun on the man, feeling triumphant, but the feeling turned ice cold. Cold as ice. It turned to ice as a cold, cruel grin spread across the man's face. "Are you thinking of the men in your camp or your little friend?" The man asked and shook his head. "It doesn't matter. Like I said, there's no one to miss you." Suddenly, the ground moved. The earth shifted. Logan blamed it on the wet, steep hillside, but it was more than that. Charlie had gotten fired because of him, but in that moment, Logan knew that the 2 agents had been forced to follow him to Alaska had gotten much, much worse. He could barely get the question out. "What did you do?" "What I've only begun to do. Now walk." The Russian accent seemed thicker now, with a new, awful knowledge. "We cannot fall behind schedule." He reached for Logan and grabbed him by the handcuffs and jerked him to his feet, tossing him around as he weighed nothing. But even as the clouds grew thicker, Logan's mind grew clearer. He could see it now. Not what had happened, what was happening. The Russian was right about one thing. Logan had watched a lot of movies, and he knew there was no negotiating for his freedom, no tearful, tense exchange. He'd seen this man's face. He'd heard his voice. Logan was a dead man, just like the two agents who had brought him here, just like Maddie. Logan heard a fierce roar that rumbled like thunder in the dense woods, but it wasn't a bear. It was his own mangled cry. He didn't think or feel or worry anymore. He just lunged at the man who was standing beneath him on the hillside. Maddie was dead, and something inside of Logan was alive and fighting, and he didn't want to stop until these woods were covered with blood. He felt the man falling and grabbed him tighter, and the two of them were rolling over and over across the rocks. Tree limbs slashed against each other. Logan tasted blood. His screams filled the air, a terrible, piercing cry, and he didn't try to stop. His hands were still cuffed, and he slammed them into the man's gut, pounding like a hammer with both fists. The man was dazed, but he wasn't stopped, and when Logan pulled back again, the Russian moved like a blur, reversing their positions and leaping to crouch over Logan, pressing his chest against the rocky ground. Logan never even saw the knife, not until he felt it cutting into the soft flesh between his pinky finger and his neighbor. When at first his hand were too cold, too numb, and Logan was too high on adrenaline and anger to feel any pain. When he saw the bright red drop of blood that bubbled up from his too white skin, he felt the kidnapper's warm breath on his cold cheek, heard the accented warning. "This is not part of what I need you," and the man whispered near Logan's ear. "Now, you must ask yourself, do you really want to lose more than just your girlfriend and your pride today?" The man seemed to think he'd asked an excellent question and made an undeniable point. He didn't know that Logan had already lost everything that meant anything to him. His pinky finger was the least of his problems. No, the only thing Logan cared about was vengeance, and he wasn't going to get that. Not right then. Not right there. He was going to get Maddie back with his bare fists. He had to. I'm never going to get Maddie back, Logan realized. It was only harder than it should have been to keep breathing. The man dragged him up to his feet, pushed him in the back. "Now walk." Maddie knew her way across the river. Even cold and hungry and still a little too uneasy on her feet, she crossed the old fallen tree enough times to know that it could hold her. The man didn't know it, though. Maybe he hadn't wanted to risk climbing down the steep hill to reach it. In any case, by Maddie's estimation, she gained at least an hour on them. And she'd probably been unconscious for at least that long, so she didn't know how much good it did on her. Besides, her head hurt too badly to think too much, so she just kept walking. When she reached the place where the riverbank gave way to the trees, Maddie saw the broken branches. Even with the rain, something had dug so deeply into the soft earth while searching for footing that it was almost impossible to miss the rents. Now, Maddie looked up at the sky, at the clouds that were growing thicker and darker. Maybe it was the drizzle that clung to her hair, or the shock from her long, hard fall, but it was definitely getting colder, and it was going to get a whole lot worse before it started getting better, in a lot of ways. Someone might miss Logan's tracks if they didn't know where to look for them. If the weather kept getting worse, so Maddie walked to the river and grabbed the biggest rock she could find and placed it like an arrow, pointing that way. She piled a few smaller stones on top, just in case, just high enough to be noticed in a few inches of snow, and ice, but not so high that they might topple. Then Maddie lowered her hood. She brought her hand to the side of her face and pressed her palm against the largest of the rocks until her bloody handprints shone like an eerie beacon, announcing to the world, trouble came this way. But trouble was Maddie's family business, so she did the only thing that made sense. She followed it. The footprints were easy to track for a while, but the ground was rockier and the rain was harder. Luckily, there were a lot of trampled bushes and broken branches. It looked like a bulldozer had passed that way, and a part of her wondered if Logan was doing it on purpose. She didn't know him well enough to say anymore, and that hurt almost as much as her head. But she could feel the swelling behind her hair. But that was good, right? Wasn't it? Better than to swell out than in. Maybe her brain would be okay if her hair, even if her hair would look terrible. Maddie consoled herself with the fact that there wouldn't be anyone around to see it. And that was that and the whole life and death thing. That's what made her bend at the waist and leverage herself higher and higher. The rain was still falling, but she was making good time. Her shoulder, though, probably from the fall, and sometimes she found herself stopping, wincing, because it felt like a sword was going through her ribs. But she was pretty sure they weren't broken, just bruised. It could have been worse. She told herself. She could have left home without a raincoat like a moron. Was Logan wearing a raincoat? Maddie couldn't remember. She just knew he was a moron, and the thought of should have worried her, but she just smiled a little. Logan was gone without a trace, and she was calling him a moron in her mind. Things were almost back to normal. But then Maddie saw something on the hill, an overturned rock, like someone had struggled to make a step. Not quite a moron, she told herself, and went to the rock, stacked half a dozen others on top of it, and a small limb sticking straight up for good measure. Then she started up the hill again, certain that she was on the right path. She wanted to run. She wanted to find him and make sure he was okay, and just have a worrying part of her behind her, the worrying part behind her. But she also had to be careful, be quiet. If the man thought she was dead, then then that could be her best weapon. She left her second favorite hatchet stuck in a blade deep in the tree at the top of the hill. No, after all. So she stayed quiet, even though that came with its own set of problems. As Maddie pushed through a piece of heavy brush, she heard a sound that sometimes haunted her nightmares. Part growl, part grunt. Maddie froze on the path as the bear pivoted and saw her. It must have smelled her or heard her messing with the rocks and cursing Logan under her breath, because thankfully it wasn't scared, and it had known she was there, even if Maddie couldn't say the same. It was covered in thick fur, fat and ready for winter, as it rubbed up against the tree like it had an inch it couldn't quite reach. But it didn't charge at her. If anything, it seemed annoyed that she'd intrude on its solitude. So Maddie did the one thing she could. She put a hand on the hilt of her knife as she eased back slowly, slipping away. When her heart returned to its chest, she veered off the beaten path but kept climbing. She didn't stop to think about the truth of her situation. There were two predators in these woods, and Maddie wasn't sure which of them scared her most.